She is the deputy of the head of the language policy division in Strasbourg, and she organized very well all the preparatory work and at the end the work of experts. Maria Stoikova, professor of the Sofia University, by the way, last year we signed a contract with Sofia University, so she is our double partner from Oslo, Europe, and from Sofia University. Her experience is very important for us because, as you know, we had the same situation during long period, and now we have a very similar. But the experience of Bulgaria, which now is the European Union, is very important. How it's possible to implement in Armenia. And my very good friend, Jean-Paul Beko, professor at Paris University, is a well-known specialist in the teaching of French language, and he did it in every country. I don't know where you never been till now. But he is also author or co-author of the very valuable research, and this research became the foundation for all these types of activity. The principles of linguistic policy, and now these principles are implemented in many countries outside Europe, and especially in the preparing a framework for the monitoring and improving the situation on the ground. All these reports are devoted to the situation of the current situation on the ground. They are channeled from this main book, which was prepared by Professor Jean-Paul Beko and the other professor from Britain, Michael Weigel. Of course, you know this two-volume, two versions, executive version and full version of the principles of language linguistic policy. I don't even know the proper name of these volumes. And now, let me begin our works.
Thank you very much, Søren. Hello, good morning to everybody. Hello to Rich on his own in London. I'm very pleased indeed to be with you here today on the 60th anniversary of the Council of Europe, because the Council of Europe was created exactly 60 years ago. The Council of Europe is not coming to Armenia to say what Armenia should do to have a good language policy. On the contrary, we were here last year and the year before, and we have learned a lot from Armenia. All of you have a lot of experience. We are learning from you, and I think this is really a process of mutual communication and learning. But of course, the Council of Europe has a number of principles in the field of language policies, which are in accordance of the main principles of the Council of Europe. To become a member of the Council of Europe, there are no economic criteria. There are criteria such as democracy, rule of law, and human rights. That are the main principles of the Council of Europe. So what does that mean in the field of languages? For example, language learning should be a possibility for all the learners and not reserved to just a number of learners from the elite. And the learner should really be in the center of the process. There should be learning opportunities for all the learners, language learning opportunities, which look for social inclusion. And the learning, we know that language skills nowadays are really necessary for all the citizens to be able to really participate in our democratic societies. That is one of the objectives of language learning. And we need to make sure, and the education system should ensure, that learners also develop intercultural competence, so that not only they can communicate in another language, but they are able to accept and to tolerate difference in other cultures. We know also that differences are not only between speakers of different languages, but inside the same society. So this intercultural competence we need to develop in language classes, but throughout the whole educational system. And what we very much aim for is that the educational systems throughout Europe ensure diversification, the diversification on the languages on offer, so that the students can choose between different languages. So that was to say a few words about the main principles in the field of language policies of the Council of Europe. What we have done so far in our language policy division, which is the department to which I belong, could be divided in a number of domains, main fields of action. In the field of foreign languages, that is where we are best known, because we have been working in this field for nearly 50 years. And the main tools, which are very much known throughout Europe and even beyond, in the field of foreign languages, are this document which is called the Common European Framework for Languages, Learning, Teaching and Assessment, and which has been translated into 35 languages, including Armenian, and 3 other translations are currently underway. This document is not prescriptive neither. It is a whole descriptive document about many parameters and things you should think of if you are a professional in the field of languages. It is just a document helping to reflect on your activity, and also a kind of meta-language for communication across languages and across different fields in the professional field of language learning, teaching and assessment. And related to the Common European Framework, which is only the central document, we have many other documents, like, for example, the Manual for Relating Language Examinations to the Common European Framework. We are currently developing a guide for test development according to the Common European Framework. There is a guide for users for the Common European Framework. There's a compendium of case studies of the use of the Common European Framework. And more importantly, I think, currently we are in the process of developing a guide for developing curricula according to the Common European Framework, which means curriculum for plurilingual education and intercultural education. So this guide is not yet available, but we are working on it, and we hope it will be available later this year. And closely linked to the Common European Framework, we have this portfolio, European Language Portfolio, which you know because it exists in Armenia, which is a document for use by the learners themselves, and which is developed in the countries themselves. So there are 100 portfolios, exactly 100 portfolios validated today, and they exist in the different countries because they are developed according to the education system of the country itself and to the language used in the country. So there is no general portfolio, but there are principles according to which these portfolios are developed, and they are validated at the Council of Europe. Another major domain in the Council of Europe nowadays is our project on the languages of schooling, which is not a foreign language anymore. We are now very much looking into the issue of language of schooling, because that is the language which should ensure successful learning. There are many learners with difficulties in the school system simply because they are not, they don't have a good command of this language of schooling. Even if they speak at home the same language which is used in the schools, the language is not exactly the same. You don't speak with your parents, with your friends, the same language which you use with teachers, which is a kind, in inverted commas, a kind of academic language. So the learners, even if they speak the mother tongue corresponds to the language of the schooling, they need to acquire a kind of different language, which also develops over time according with the rhythm that they learn a new subject. Each subject has a specific language. So by learning the subject, the learner improves his language skills in that specific language. And by developing the language skills, they develop the content of the subject. So not much has been done worldwide about languages of schooling. So that is why we thought in our division that, well, for the time being, we could leave a little bit aside foreign languages, because all the professionals in the field of foreign language have now a lot of documents and tools available to do good language learning and teaching. But in the field of language schooling, a lot has to be done yet. We will have our next conference on the language of schooling in Strasbourg on the 8th to 10th of June. And by then we hope to upload on our website important documents in this field. So even if you are a teacher of foreign languages, I'm sure you will find on our website very interesting documents, even for your teaching of foreign languages. But all the teachers in the school system will find on there interesting documents to reflect upon. And as foreign language specialists, I'm sure you will be able to contribute a lot. Because what we aim for is a global approach to language learning and teaching, so that teachers of foreign languages work together with the teachers of the main subjects, for example, the teachers of Armenian, but also the teachers of history, geography, and so on, who use Armenian as a means for teaching their subject. So that is our main project nowadays. And then we have also some other projects concerning the integration of migrants and minorities, because with increasing mobility, we have more and more people living in a country which is not their country of origin. So languages are, of course, a major condition for the integration into a new home country. But we also realize that language policies has been set up in the different countries without much awareness of the real needs of the migrants. So we set up this project to give some orientation to the governments in our member states to really reflect on the policies for the integration of migrants and minorities in general. And for minority languages, we have, of course, our legal instrument, which is the Charter for Legal and Minority Languages, also ratified by Armenia. And we have a major document, a more recent one, which we call the Intercultural Autobiography. In fact, the title is a bit more complete, because it is called the Autobiography of Intercultural Encounters, which was initially developed as a kind of extension of the European language portfolio. But when speaking with our ELT contact persons, we really became aware that interculturality is in all the domains, even in the same society, among people speaking the same language. So we developed this new document with the help of specialists in history, in intercultural dialogue, interreligious dialogue, and with some specialists on psychology for children, because we needed a special edition for children who are not able yet to do this on their own. So Maria, I think we can even skip the next one, because on this we have the list of countries for whom we already went through the whole procedures for the policy profile, and which I already mentioned. So now turning to the process itself of language policies. What does it involve? As I already said, we are not here to tell you what to do. It is rather a system which allows the countries who ask for assistance for the Council of Europe to come and reflect together on the language policies implemented in the different countries so far. We would also like to stress the very good things going on in your country and make them available to the other countries. And then to reflect together on the different challenges you have in your country and the educational systems, so that together we can reflect on possible ways to go further. So it is really a dialogue between the Council of Europe, the civil society in Armenia, and the authorities, the educational authorities in Armenia. All this together, in addition to all the principles I already mentioned a few minutes ago, one major principle we would like to promote through this language education policy profile is the promotion of plurilingualism. This real plurilingual competence we would like all the Europeans to develop, all the citizens. and therefore to promote diversification of the languages on offer in the educational systems. So here I have a next slide maybe to show the process, where we start and where we go to. To start this whole process, it is only if the country wishes that we come into the country to reflect together on the language policies of the country. So the first thing to do is for the country to send an application to the Council of Europe, and more specifically to get an agreement from our Steering Committee for Education. The Steering Committee for Education has to give its agreement for this procedure to start. Then, once this agreement has been given, we come to the Council, and in general it is just a member of the Secretariat of the Council of Europe and the coordinator of the team for a discussion with the authorities to really fix together the main priorities of the country. Then, when we return to Strasbourg, and depending on the priorities of the country, we select a number of experts to set up the team. In the meantime, the country writes its country report describing the language policies so far, in the country, and also underlining the main challenges and the points on which they would like some views from external experts. Then we come, after having read this national report, we come to the country for a week visit, and we discuss with as many stakeholders as possible. So the very first contact visit was in April 2008. I came to Armenia with Dr. Lick. In April 2008, we came again, the five of us, for a week study visit. In September last year, September 2008, we submitted the expert report, which was then translated into Armenian, and two members of the Armenian team came to Strasbourg on the 1st of December last year, and we went through the whole expert report to discuss a number of details in there. And we are here now for this roundtable, and we hope, after having gone quickly through the whole report again, that you will be able to give your impressions and your opinions, your feelings about this report, so as to allow us to finalize the last document, which will be called the Language Education Policy Profile of Armenia. We have already done a kind of transversal analysis of the 16 finalized, the 12 finalized policy profiles. There are, of course, very many different realities in the member states, and they all have particular preoccupations at a given point in time. So it is very difficult to have common themes. But we see that there are a number of common issues coming up in the different profiles, and you can see them here on the screen on the next one. For example, the mother tongue or the languages of schooling are something which come back in most of the profiles. The mother tongue linked also to the issue of national identity. The issue of standards for quality come back in all the profiles. The issue of continuity between the different sectors of education and coherence, they come back in all the profiles as well. Teacher training is a major concern in all the profiles. And the role of English as the main language taught in the educational system, and how this is linked to the other languages in the system. These are themes that come back everywhere. This transversal analysis will soon be made available on our website. I'm sure you will be interested in reading about that as well. So just to finalize my little introduction to this language policy profiles, I could say that most probably the two documents which have been the main resources for all the countries have been this document, the Common European Framework for Language Learning, Teaching and Assessment, and all the related studies and reports, and the Guide for the Development of Language Education Policies in Europe, of which Jean-Claude is one of the two co-authors. So I think these two documents, and linked to the guide which I just mentioned, there are a whole list of thematic studies which are also available on our website. So I think these are the main documents available. So that was to set the theme of our working activity here today. I now would give the floor maybe to Litkin if we manage to reestablish the connection so that he can give an overview of the report before we really turn into the details of the report. If we do not manage to have the connection again, then our colleague Maria Stoicheva will take over and speak on behalf of our coordinator Litkin.
Now we shall try to do it. This time, I would like to express my gratitude for your very interesting and coherent presentation. Of course, we have a lot of activity at Council of Europe, and we are proud that we are doing from '98 we are in contact, and we would like to include your achievements in our curricula, in our methodology. And by the way, when we prepared our report, our national report, it was very useful to use your framework, from practical and theoretical, very elaborated, very sophisticated, and it was easy to use it in any country. Of course, each country has its peculiarity, but if you have such framework, it's easy to see your big and points. For example, for us, for the novelty that there is no state regulation on preschool education, there is no even monitoring and supervision of adult education. Anybody can do it without any involvement of the specialist, etc. So a lot of things that we can.
The floor is yours now. You can speak.
I'm not hear very well. I thought it was like high I think maybe it doesn't work very well.
We can hear you.
Sorry.
We can hear you, Liz. Please go on.
Okay. You want me to clarify what you're saying?
You have prepared an introduction. If you could go on with that. Your introduction.
You speak about no? You keep on freezing, so I can't see what's happening.
Yeah. So, can you try to start to speak about your introduction, Liz?
Okay, just if you don't hear me, make some very extravagant gesture.
Okay.
And I will know what's happening. Okay, could I first of all say how sorry I am that I can't be here with you? It's very unfortunate. I fail, but dogs are defiant because of that. So at least there's a technology to stop I'll be serious. I'd just like to say, then I'm sure that Joanna had already said that the years of coming to our meeting and doing this profile was very rewarding for all of us. Not only things, well, and that's another reason I'm going to be sitting at my computer and not with you today in Europe. And I hope you have many hosts later on. Corby being found is such an interest. Despite what we assess challenging circumstances, many on in Armenian language policy.
Sorry, it is not really clear. We can hear some words, but not everything.
Okay, could I suggest that because he doesn't know what I'd say, then maybe it would be better if Maria reads it to you?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And we will call you in the afternoon to give some feedback. Okay? Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, we send a report of other.
Let me just say to everybody,
Thank you.
Thank you.
okay.
And we send you all the report of our event, all the discussion, and maybe we'll be in touch and discuss all the comments of the report. Thank you. Bye.
It has prepared to say as an introductory note to the presentation of the expert report. First of all, I would like to echo what Joanna has already said. The experience of the profile was really rewarding for all of us in the team, both on professional and on human level. This is another reason why this means Liz, is very sad not to be with us today, especially as he was looking forward to a toast later in the afternoon. On a more serious note, one of the reasons we have found that it is such an interesting experience is that despite some of the challenging circumstances, there are so many positive elements in Armenian language policy, from which we have learned a great deal. This underlines the importance of the profile process itself, which is not one of consultation, but one of mutual learning and working together. Since inevitably, in the course of this morning, we are likely to be talking about things that might change or develop, I would like to begin the discussion by reminding ourselves of some of these very positive facts. We were very much, for example, impressed by the level of bilingualism in large parts of Armenian population, which we believe provides openness to new cultural and linguistic diversity, which very much mirrors the plurilingual aspirations of the Council of Europe. We also noted that the Armenian state has put in place a generally supporting legal framework in support of languages, both Armenian and minority languages, and the learning of international languages. This is now underpinned by a major reform program in teacher training, about which we have more to say in the course of the morning. What we have also noticed, despite our colleagues' eternal modesty, is a very high level of language learning in many phases of the Armenian education, and a big motivation of language learners, which is not always the case in Europe. Although it is not for me, as an outsider, to draw conclusions about this, we did feel that this was a reflection of a popular mood in your country which supported education and greater linguistic competence. In conclusion then, there are many positive things already happening in Armenia. What I think our contribution can be is help you reflect on these, build on them, and fulfill new aspirations as you seek to construct a modern and flexible educational system, in particular in its linguistic aspects. I would like to say a few words about the process of the profile. First, it has been quite a long process, which has allowed us a good time for reflection. In fact, Joanna Pontier and I first came to Erevan to discuss with colleagues over 2 years ago. I think this has enabled us together to create a report which is solidly based and really does meet some of real current needs. As many of you know, following the initial visit 2 years ago, when we identified some early questions, such as the role of the Armenian language, such as the languages taught at school, your colleagues produced an extremely comprehensive, and if I may say so, frank and self-critical country report, which enabled us to understand so much more about Armenian realities. We then focused on further investigations on 4 main areas. Firstly, the general context. This is something that Joanna will say more later this morning. Secondly, issues of identity relating to Armenian language and the languages of national minorities in Armenia, which Jean-Claude Beaco will refer to later. Thirdly, issues of the coherence of language policy, which I am going to talk a bit later this morning. And fourthly, the whole issue of quality in relation to curriculum, assessment and teacher training. If I might, at this point, I would like to pay some tribute to another missing member of our team, Dolores Solet, which is also not very well enough to travel, who would herself have lots to say about these questions of quality, to which she made a big contribution to our report. All of our ideas were resulted from a very many discussions, observations that we were lucky to have in Armenia, involving many of you here today. As I said in these few opening remarks, the week that we spent was a very rich one for us in so many ways, and we thank all of you for your hospitality and for the ideas that you shared with us. We have encapsulated those ideas in 15 proposals, which you might wish to consider as you look for the future. We hope that they are shared ideas, but if they are misunderstandings, we take responsibility for those and will look for greater clarification in the course of today and beyond. I would like now my colleagues to show you an overview of the content of the report and wish you an excellent discussion. An overview of the content of the report. We all believe that you actually have the report in Armenian. So these are the main points that we have included in the report. Overview of the current situation, including a reflection on the important historical and political influences, the generally supportive legal framework, the search of structural coherence that we have observed in our discussions, and the role of the educational reform. Further, we have included the main issues for discussion that we suggested, and they concern the context of the implementation of the language policy in the country, some important issues of identity, coherence and quality. And in the fourth, last big chapter of the expert report, we have included some points that we consider important for looking into the future, where actually are the 15 proposals that we make.
So let's try to be as clear as possible when going through the report together. We decided to go the following way. As you saw in the previous slide, in the report we have 4 major parts in point number 3, which is called issues for discussion. Among the issues for discussion, we have the first point concerning contextual realities of Armenia. The second one is about identity, national identity in Armenia, the coherence across the system, educational system, and issues related to quality. I will first go through the first point about context, and then we will stop and give you the floor so that we can interact on this issue. I will just remind very quickly what is written in the report. There are a few contextual issues which are beyond our scope. We are specialists in the field of language education, and there are some realities on which we can't really intervene. For example, concerning your history and related economic context. If there are some limited financial resources, for example, we can't really change that with our policy profile here. There is a geopolitical factor, for example, related to some closed borders, which may make it difficult for many of you to have easy contacts with speakers of other languages. That is also a reality which will probably evolve quite quickly in the near future, but that is a reality on which we cannot really react or act, let's say. There are a few other contextual issues which are raised in the report and for which we proposed at the very end of the report, among the 15 proposals, some action so that changing some reality, reflecting on them, they can be taken into account to develop in a better sense. Among these contextual realities, we noted that there is not much relationship between the civil society, including the educational system, and the employers, which implies very often that the educational system is quite separate from the needs of the employers. And as a consequence, vocational education, for example, is not very much valued, and the employers don't rely on the diplomas issued by the vocational education. And they tend to over-rely on university degrees, but these university degrees often do not correspond to the needs of the employers. So among the proposals, we mentioned something about greater engagement, more discussion with employers, so as to have a better accordance among the educational aims and the needs of the employers. The second issue mentioned in the report is the role of the private sector. As far as we heard from you and we could read in the national report, the role of the private sector is still quite small in Armenia. But according to the new law on education, for example, learners could, when paying for it, have some extra courses in the official education system. I don't know whether this is already a reality or whether it will happen in the future, but that is something happening in the educational system itself. So the ministry knows about it and can monitor it. Even without additional fees. Okay, that's good. But there is another issue which is of major concern to us. It is about private tutorials. As higher education seems to be something very important here. And as so far students have to take an entrance exam, it seems we have the impression that learners take these extra classes outside and pay for them, this private tutorial, to have better chances to have a place at university. The educational law apparently is also worried about this. Educational authorities are aware of this, and with the institution of a general unified exam for the end of secondary education, allowing learners to have access to university education, this problem is already being tackled, it seems to us. Because if the final exam of secondary education is made according to the main objectives of secondary education, then the learners would not probably need to go to seek for extra tutorial classes outside the school system. So that is something developing in a very good sense, it seems to us. But it would maybe, and as we put in our proposals, be a good idea to gather more information about this private sector, not only in Yerevan, but across the country. Because having clear data on this, it will be easier to act on it. The last major contextual issue raised in our report is the role of international agencies and organizations. As I said, Armenia is a full member of the Council of Europe and has indeed been a very active member. For example, in the field of languages, and as Mr. Zolian mentioned a few minutes ago, the Common European Framework has been very much used for the curriculum reform here and is being used also for the examinations. So these are documents put at the disposal by the Council of Europe, freely used by Armenia, which keeps the control, when using these European tools, keeps the control on its own system. There is also, for example, the European language portfolio and the Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. These are all free actions from Armenia using European tools and documents available. But there's also some other international influence in Armenia, often funded by international NGOs or by the World Bank, and we felt some sense of worry in Armenia that sometimes the educational authorities have no say on the use of this international funding. And we have a major proposal, but I leave that to the end. And Professor Beato, who has kept very quiet for the moment, will speak about that later on. That seems to be a major concern. And we are also not very clear about the interaction between the Cultural Institute as the Goethe Institute, Cervantes, and Cervantes does not have an office here, but the French Institute and so on, how they interact among them and with the Ministry of Education. Our time here was too short to find out about that. And we do not know if there is a real coordination about the main objectives of this cultural institute and the main objectives of education in Armenia. So it would maybe be a good issue for discussion. So if you agree, we would now very much like to listen to you. If you have read the report or if you have some reactions to what I have just said, we would be happy to take that into account in writing the final document.
Any comments or questions on the subject which was introduced just now?
So he's in charge of a program which has to deal with the curricula, standards, and educational program in Zilma. So this program is under consideration, but it's going to be completed quite soon. The program is being financed by the World Bank. Again, I want to reiterate that I'm very happy for this meeting with experts from the Council of Europe. And also, I wish our colleague from Great Britain a quick recovery. Hope to meet again in Armenia, Yerevan. And many thanks for the words in the expert report written according to the country report. So the question and the challenge is that education presupposes continuity. So the demands of a labor or job market are such that each child needs to learn a foreign language starting even from a kindergarten or nursery school, from a very elementary level education. And of course the language predominating is English as a foreign language. But according to our curricula and according to our state standards, we don't have a right to teach English as a foreign language starting from the very first form. So the situation is like this. A child who goes from kindergarten to school, secondary school, he or she doesn't learn any foreign language in the first form. And he learns the language starting from the second form only. So there has been much debate and discussion concerning this question, and now my concern and my question is, taking into consideration the experience of the European countries, do you think it is right not to offer a foreign language starting from the first year and the second form? What's your opinion on this issue? Yes. So the next problem refers to the offer by schools of a third foreign language. We know that Armenian is our mother tongue and it is the basis of our language thinking. Now the question refers to the offer by schools of German, English and French.
I think it makes եւ հատկապես միայն այդ խնդիրը չի, որովհետեւ ենթադրում է բազմալեզու կրթությունը եւ բազմամշակութային փոխհարաբերություններ։ Ենթադրում է նաեւ միջավայր, որը մեզ մոտ ցավոք սրտի եթե նայենք ավելի շատ պարսկական միջավայրն է Պարսկաստանի պարսկալեզու քաղաքացիների կազմել։ Այստեղ նույնպես ունենայի իմանալ
So as you know, plurilingual education presupposes a multicultural atmosphere. It is to say we have some neighboring countries, as you know, like Turkish, Arabians and so on, and my concern is this a multicultural atmosphere provided? Because it's not just enough to learn many foreign languages and have no chance to use them and in communication actually. So I don't want to make any political statements, but to know that today the question of opening the frontier between Armenia and Turkey is under discussion, and a major question of the Turkish language as language of communication arises in the current situation. And we are to elaborate a new language policy in this current situation, and I would like to get some feedback from your experienced countries just to help us elaborate the language education policy in this situation to meet the current needs. Okay, and my last question refers to the tutorials, which exist in very large quantities in Armenia, and you know that each and every person can go pay to a tutor and get non-formal education. But the matter is whether this education is on the level, whether we give like normal and proper proficiency in the language they teach, and what's your attitude towards this private sector? And my last remark refers to the expert report. So it was mentioned in the expert report that the curricula and the subject standards are on the level, but we have some demerits in our assessment system. And of course, I agree with this remark. And I want to say that we have already done some considerable work to amend the situation in this year's assessment. A step forward was the introduction of the new assessment system, the 10-point assessment system, and a lot of teachers have been trained to be able to use the assessment system in their everyday activities. Of course, we would like to pay more time and more effort to teacher training, both in service and initial, if we had enough resources. So the problem lies in the lack of resources. Because I think that only an 8-day program for teacher training during the year is not enough to get properly trained teachers. Thank you.
I'd like to answer, to give you some feedback on the first two elements you present in your question. My reaction is not an official position of the Council of Europe, of course. It's my opinion as a professional in this field. As far as the first year introduction of a foreign language in the system, there are many ways to consider that. Not in all European countries this is the case, because the main concern on the first year is national language and school language, and many stakeholders think that there might be some difficulties to make children approach the written version, for example, of the national language or school language and another foreign language. This is the concern they have. Second point here is that maybe the question is the question of early learning. As we know, early learning is not at 7 or 8. Early learning is at 3 or 4. And so if you differ 1 year now from 7 or 8, it's out of the reach of the early possibilities, or the window, of the learning a foreign language with some kind of facilities which are accorded to this early learning of a foreign language. So it's already too late for that. It's a preschool teaching. It's not an early teaching. And my third remark is about time. You say maybe we need 1 year more. The question is not maybe we need 1 year more, but what do we do with the year we have after? So what kind of efficiency you've got in teaching? And maybe you don't need more hours, but you need more efficient hours, which is not exactly the same thing. And in this kind of reflection, we know that the efficiency of 1 hour of teaching a language decreases when you go further. That is, the potential of 1 hour is lower and lower as long as you go to the 12th year. So there are ceiling effects that make that the hour is decreasing in efficiency as long as you go. So the question is not always a question of hours and time. It's more a question of objective methodology and things like that. This is my reaction to your first question. For your second question about the third foreign language offered in 5th grade and the possibility of learning French, German, and what is the third one? English, French, German. Okay, we know that, and once again, it's a personal view, it's not a Council of Europe view, of course. We know that we have to plan language teaching according to the national needs. And national needs are to communicate with neighbors and to communicate at international level. And so both are proper objectives. And already now in Armenia there is teaching of Iranian, there is teaching of Georgian, there is teaching of Turkish at the university, but not in secondary schools for the moment. So this preoccupation is already there. The question is if you can open now this third language to Turkish, not having the teachers, not having programs, not having manuals, and so on. And maybe to see if on the other side of the border the Turkish people are ready. It's not, okay, donnant stuff, but if they are ready to do the same thing, because we know that in the past many Armenian people speak Turkish and many Turkish people speak Armenian. But maybe it's time to restore that kind of open repertoire in which there is room for Turkish and other languages, like Iranian, like Persian. It's another very important neighbor of Armenia. So I think, as far as I can see that national authorities are well aware of that, and maybe it's not just now the time to do it, but in the next future, I think it's a nice thing to be into consideration to open to those neighborhoods. That's all I have to say for the two questions. Thank you.
If I can add something to this remark by my colleague, again personally on the two issues that concern this part, early language learning and opening to neighboring languages of the educational system. First, I would also like to say that early language learning is one of the major issues in Europe. And this has been supported by a number of programs, and it has been considered as an area in which a lot of effort and time should be put. I can quote projects in Europe that deal with, we call it early language learning even with toddlers at the age of between 1 and 3. Engaging parents, but the aims of these programs are mostly in the area of helping children feel comfortable in a foreign language atmosphere where the language is spoken. At the same time, it's the case that in many countries in Europe, even in those in which foreign language is a compulsory subject at first grade, it is limited to particular skills. And normally, in these countries, written skill is not introduced even in the compulsory subject at first grade. So the concern that good competence in the mother tongue is an important prerequisite for any other further developing of competences in foreign languages has become a major founding base for that. The second point about opening to neighboring languages, and in the report we say something about this sometimes contradiction between the individual aspirations or wishes of the individual to learn particular foreign languages and the national needs. And sometimes they are not in line with each other because it has long been established that the personal aspiration is to learn a language that will give or provide for the individual a larger access in this global world that we live in. So it's inherent motivation to want to learn English or French or German in view of your personal career. But at the same time, every country has its national priorities, and here I would definitely agree with Jean-Claude that it is a reflection and finding the balance between individual aspirations and ambitions and national priorities and the inclusion of neighboring language is among the second. It also has to be mentioned specially that even in the individual career and individual development, sometimes the big languages, as we call them, the languages of wider communications like English and French and German, are very often considered as a must, as a basic skill that everyone should be able to use in a particular situation. And then the next foreign language that you can prove you have competence in becomes the value, the asset of the person. So this is also an area in which these two specific needs, the individual needs and the national needs, which do not always coincide, can be sort of brought together.
Thank you. A second question about the private sector in language education. Its responsibility and important supervision.
I may just understand clearly. I heard something about your question about you were concerned with the quality of this private tutorial. Is that right? That was your question. Yeah.
Well, this is out of our reach. I mean, it depends if those professionals have a quality charter, as it exists for other foreign countries where private institutions have a charter for quality and can demonstrate that what they do has some value and that it can be controlled. So it depends on the status on which those institutions are working on, and if they prepare to some external test and examination like those of the French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, and English language. So if they go to external certification and test, why not? If there are charter of quality, it's fine. If you have nothing of that, of course, you don't know what you buy, and you don't know if you buy something which is corresponding to what you know. But it depends on the customers in a way, just to try to push them into the direction of research of quality, which is absolutely feasible. Some institution like Equals in United Kingdom is proposing all the members in Europe to raise the quality of their teaching with the help of a chart, of quality charter, and they can do that very easily. So we've done the same thing in France for French as a foreign language. There is now a chart, a quality checklist, which is examined externally and can give some label. The labeling way of doing things is very helpful, and give some label, some institutions, private institutions, who are giving French lessons. So there are solutions for that.
Thank you. Let me add, because I can understand the concern of Mr. Melkonyan, and we express the same problem in our national reports. What is the problem for Armenia? As about preschool education and in adult education, that there are any educational supervision, because from the legal point of view, that is the usual business, and no professional criteria are not obliged for this business, and that is the field for not out of any control and even out of supervision.
Last year, my colleagues said that definitely at an early age of education, mother language should be dominated. I'll tell you why. I'm a pretty adult parent, okay? So in Armenia, it's actually kind of a bizarre situation when a woman almost, I'm not going to tell my age, but anyways, about 50 has got a child, 40-year-old child. So I put a kind of an experiment on him, and you know what's happening? This is the situation you can compare with the mom who is really working hard and who is just thinking and reflecting whether to call a nurse at home or not. So I have a lot of problems doing that. What happened is I was thinking, like, if I invite somebody who is a nurse and the child will pick up the qualities in the language that she is using, and my idea actually was that I am the mom, I should be the one dominating. I'm a pretty jealous mom, by the way. So what happened is I tried not to invite anyone because the first sound, the first smile should belong to the mom. So if you compare with the national language, of course I think that the national language, the mother tongue, should be overwhelming and over-dominating, here in this situation. When the first year, the child in the first class where he doesn't know foreign language, relax. It's not a problem. He's going to pick, he's going to pick it up pretty soon. I actually made an experiment. I know not a lot of, like 2 or 3 languages, okay, but I never teach him anything, okay. What's happening is I never taught him Russian. So as somebody who's doing science, I'm just doing experiments, okay. I never taught him any Russian. But what's happening? He speaks Russian. It's like he's picking up from the movies and everything. Probably you will be thinking that I'm a kind of conservative person in Armenia. I am. I'm a nationalistic person in a good sense, okay? But somebody who has been a lot in European countries and has got a lot of European colleagues and American colleagues, okay? Somebody who appreciates the knowledge and somebody who is really trying to do some educational things, reforms in Armenia. But yet, I want to go back to the national, like authority of spirit. The child, at an early age, should recognize mom first.
But what has
Definitely.
mom to do with foreign languages?
Excuse me?
What has mom to do with foreign languages?
Mom presents, introduce the mother tongue. This is a comparison, okay? The mom should do the first thing, the first sound, the first letter, okay, the first smile. First you should recognize your own mom, then afterwards on theirs. First you should recognize your mother tongue, and then afterwards a foreign language. This is a true thing. In the second year, please feel free to do that. So it's going to pick up a lot of languages. The more you talk, the more you teach, the better, civilized person you is. Thank you very much.
Last week we visited the south of Armenia. We went to the region of Negri, Tunik, and we visited several schools. And there was a very interesting situation for us. There are in Negri and Agarak, that is the next town near Megri, there are only 3 schools. And in all these schools they teach German. Only in one school some pupils have the opportunity to learn English because there are no English teachers. They only have German teachers. And I think it doesn't make sense to learn German in this region. And we ask teachers and pupils and parents, and they don't understand why we have to learn German. We are far away from Germany. And I think it would be good for the future to teach here the language of the neighbors, that they can communicate with their neighbors. And I would agree. I agree with your statement to study the real situation in the rural areas, because the situation here, far away from Yerevan, or not so far away from Yerevan, is quite different from the situation in the capital. And last but not least, please don't forget Russian. You have a good example here. What use the young people in the internet? Russian resources, Russian programs. And it's a pity, but the Russian of the young generation is quite poor.
I'm going to give a very brief account of the second part of the report that you might see there. 2 points, Armenian language and national minorities. As far as Armenian language is concerned, it's easy to see that it's a question which is very live in the public opinion, and that have provoked a lot of discussion, debates, and argumentation pro and contra, which is a hot subject, let's say. Why? We can understand that very, very simply, because Armenian language is part of the Armenian identity, which is very obvious, because Armenian was, in a way, put at the second row during all the Soviet period, and because of the growing presence of English in schools and everywhere, which is considered as a way of maybe not permitting the Armenian to develop itself, and is a kind of attack against its purity, which is a term which is always, I think, used. That's what we've heard around on this question, with the problem of Eastern and Western Armenian diaspora and so on. Of course, the Council of Europe has no position about purity, and it's not on the remit of Council of Europe to discuss purity of language or whatever. So what I'm going to say, again, is about what, as a professional, we can say about this question, which is a very, I said, traditional question in a way for national languages, because it's a question that you have to face on many countries. It has been faced in Greece when it was the question of the Demontiki and Katavrousa. It's faced all the time in France, where the Académie Française is watching the purity of French language, and so on. So this is a rather normal question, first of all, not to be so dramatic, even if it is felt like that here. It's a very classical question. So, what do we propose? Not much, but first, it seems evident that nobody can do nothing about linguistic evolution. There is not much you can do for preventing people to speak the way they want. You can control written production, you can control relations between state and citizen, the language they use for communicate with the authorities in justice, in labor contracts, in advertising and whatever, but not beyond that. So the only way to try to have an influence of that is to create an efficient institute of neology, which is working, like you have one in Quebec, for example, and to try to provide the words that the Armenian needs for the new social needs. So, to continue to equip Armenian with all the tools that a modern language needs, in particular terminology dictionaries that should maybe give the resources to translate or communicate on certain specific technical and scientific domains. And to have maybe an exact description of the ways in which Armenian is effectively used, because often all those questions are not based on description, scientific description. They are based on details, on reactions of very epidemical, let's say, and not about the real way in which Armenian is used in media by young people, etc. So we need probably, as elsewhere, we need so serious description of the ways in which Armenian now is used in Yerevan by youngsters outside and so on. So I think we need scientific basis to decide something, and not only opinion, which is very important, but there is no end to this discussion if we have not solid argumentation to do something. Another thing I want to add is about variation. Variety and variation are normal feature of any language. Every language has individual variation, stylistic variation, contextual variation, geographical variation, social variation, and historical variation. That's it. Languages evolve, and we have to consider that nobody is in a position to stop that. So the question is not to consider that identity and national identity is a fixed concept, and that to continue to be ourselves we have to continue to be as we were before, but that identity is evolving, and that identity is always something you have to build on and to continue to build. So there is no fixed identity. There are many identities, and the best way to be the same is to change. Because if you don't change, you don't become identical to yourself. You just become whole. That's it. And it's not the way to do that. So I think that the philosophy of identity has to be changed in a way, rethink in a way in which identity is not perceived as a fixed set of elements, but as a complex of variation which consent you to be the same, like we are as person. We have the same identity, but we have not the same age, and that's the way you have to cope with the history, personal history, and national history. Maybe the point is for schools, because this is a public debate, a national debate. Maybe the most important point is for schooling and for the teaching of Armenian as school language and national language. Maybe there we should make pupils and students aware of the variety of Armenians, of the variations of Armenia, of the historical, social, geographical, and so on variation of Armenian, and consider that the modern is not a norm and variation, but the modern is a set of varieties. That language is not standard language and varieties which are in or out the standard, but that the modern is, every language is a complex architecture of variation, and it's important that kids might be in a way given awareness for that at the beginning. And this is, in this way we work on the new project that Jona described to you, on the project of language of schooling, let's say. This is central. As far as diaspora is concerned, I don't think the best question to face is whether we should teach or they should teach Eastern or Western, considering that Western Armenia is not unique. It's a lot of variety all over the world, and it's not so simple. The question, and that's what we say in the report, is not that, is that many people from the diaspora lose Armenia, and that the main thing to do is try to maintain Armenia in diaspora. And the question is not which one, is what is the best way, let's be pragmatic, what is the best way to maintain Armenian in the diaspora? And we might answer in certain ways according to certain situations, but the question of what we have to transfer and transmit from generation to generation is not the main urgent, is what can we do for Armenians to continue to live in those communities, and this is the main point. And the purity of Armenian, for me, is secondary. So what we propose in the report is proposal number 3 on page 38 of the English version. It's on the screen. So it's a very vague and open proposal, but it means that maybe this discussion is not to be left to media, and this discussion might, in some ways, be organized, structured by national authorities with the contribution of everybody, of every opinion, but be given some scientific and clear basis instead of having this eternal discussion about, can go on. But as it is very interesting for every people, journalists go on that because it raises interest and makes themselves a newspaper, which is a nice idea. Okay, for minorities, we noticed in the report that there is a very complete and propitious legal framework for provisions for minorities in Armenia. In Constitution, Armenia ratified the chart and so on. That practically 98% of Armenian citizens speak Armenian, and that minorities represent 2 or 3% of the global population. So, from a legal point of view, there is nothing to add to that. There has been a great effort of all the Armenian authorities and people to cope with this situation, which is not dramatic. The only question we have to face is the implementation of that. And it is very different according to regions, mazes, and according to languages. There are not many problems for Russian. Some problem with Greek because one school was closed, as I was saying. The questions are mainly for Kurdish, Assyrian, Chaldean, and Yazidi. And even for that, there are very many differences. We've seen 2 very different situations during this week. One in which there was prepared teachers, textbooks, pupils who were absolutely engaged on this kind of teaching, and another one in which all these things were lacking. So the problem is a question of foundings, and I'm not sure it's a question of quantity, as always. It's a question of allocations. I mean, we know that budget is what it is, funding is what it is, but maybe there could be a special attention to those communities for which there is all the legal provisions that we need, but for which not always there are the effective ways to help them to continue their own work. So here we are to the last proposition, which you can read on the screen. What we mean by analysis is not only sociolinguistic analysis, but is to check in a very precise way what's going on implementation of all those regulations and laws which are aimed to protect this linguistic diversity in Armenia. I don't know how you can organize that, but it seems to us to be an important issue, just to make legal provisions and implementation coordinated in a way in which the charter to which the charter could agree on, which is the main problem. And okay, that's all I have to say. You can read that in the report. If you have any comments or questions, that's the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very coherent presentation. But I strongly suggest all of you to read the report, because of course there are a lot of ideas, very interesting ideas, and I hope in English or in Armenian version. In addition to your presentation and to your report, I would like to inform you that quite recently, end of April, the Committee of Experts of Charter for National or Regional Minorities approved 2 reports on Armenia and Cyprus, and that now, at this moment, they are not confidential. Why I refer to this fact? Because there's a very clear reference to situation with Armenia. In Cyprus, because the Cyprus recognized West Armenian language under protection of the Charter, and there is a special obligation of the Cyprus government to protect West Armenian version. So it is not only Armenian issue, and even not only Cyprus national issue, that is in some respect under international protection. And the second, it was accepted the report of Armenia and the national minorities. I think it's very interesting to compare the reports, and main ideas are the same about the necessity of improving the situation with teacher training and teaching materials. Thank you. Now, questions about this presentation. You can see there were a lot of subjects, so we can have a very interesting discussion.
The
speaker is Mr. Lavrenti Mirjan, head of State Language Inspectorate.
Շատ ուրախ եմ, որ ձեզ կրկին Մայր Հայաստանում տեսնում ենք Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում եւ այն քննարկումները, որ այսօր այս դեպքում կայանում են։ Բոլորիս նաև պատահեցնում է, որ մեկ անգամ եւս մեր ուշադրությունը պետք է բերվի առաջին հերթին մայրենի լեզվի ուսուցմանը, նաև լեզուների փոխհարաբերությունների։
So I'm very happy to see and greet all of you here together during this wonderful discussion, and I guess the issues discussed here once again focus our attention on the preservation and teaching of a mother tongue as the first language.
Երեկվա մեր հանդիպումը Կրթության և Գիտության նախարարությունում բավական բովանդակալից էր։
So our meeting in the Ministry of Education and Science yesterday was rather substantial and comprehensive.
Շնորհակալ եմ ձեր բարձր կարծիքի համար։
Thank you all for the good opinion you have concerning our language policy in our country.
Որ դուք տվեցիք զեկույցի վերաբերյալ եւ պետք է ասեմ, որ այսօր Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում լեզվական հարաբերությունները կարգավորվում են լեզվի մասին Հայաստանի Հանրապետության օրենքով եւ լեզվական քաղաքականության պետական ծրագրով։
So I want to mention once again that today all the questions concerning the language relations are regulated in Armenia according to the law language and also the state program of language standards.
Այսօր վարչական միջոցներով հնարավոր չէ լեզուն պահպանել, այդ պետք է լեզվական հստակ քաղաքականություն իրականացնել եւ ներող նաեւ եվրոպական կրթական համակարգի չափորոշիչներից։
So it is not actually possible to preserve a language only sticking to the administrative standards. We have to implement a corresponding language policy, also taking into consideration the standards introduced by our European colleagues and all the European standards introduced by the Council of Europe.
Այսօր մենք ողջունում ենք լեզուների փոխհարաբերությունները, բազմալեզվության կարգը Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում եւ մենք պետականորեն պետք է աջակցենք, որպեսզի մեր հանրապետությունում հավուր-բաշաճի ուշադրություն դարձվի նաեւ օտար լեզուների իմացությանը։
So we are very happy to have a concept of a plurilingualism, multilingualism, this concept implemented in our country as well, and I think that the state should pay great attention to the promotion of plurilingualism, multilingualism in our country.
Մենք խնդիր ունենք հատկապես արևմտահայերենի եւ արևելահայերենի լեզուների պահպանության հարցում։
Our main concern is the preservation of the eastern and western variants of Armenian.
Եթե արևելահայերենը Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում ժամանակի ընթացքում կանոնարկվում է, ապա նույնը չի կարելի ասել արևմտահայերենի մասին։
So the state of Eastern Armenia is rather satisfactory. We can say it will be regulated in the course of time, but we can't say the same concerning Western area of Armenia because the situation is quite poor in this year.
Մեր հարկաժամ զեկուցողի անդրադարձումները արևմտահայերենի եւ արևելահայերենի մասին միանգամայն մտահոգ չէ.
So I quite agree with the concern expressed in the report of Jean-Claude Beako concerning the eastern and western areas of Armenia.
Եվ այստեղ կարևոր է յուրաքանչյուր հայի ազգային դիմանկարի ձևավորումը.
And the development of the national identity which Armenia is very important in this concern.
Շնորհակալ եմ ձեր մտահոգությունների համար.
Thank you for being so concerned about the preservation of our language and in general.
Կարծում եք, որ Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը ամեն ինչ պետք է անի, որպեսզի Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում երրորդ օտար լեզվի ուսուցումը կազմակերպվի.
And I think that the government of the Republic of Armenia must take all efforts for the introduction of a third foreign language in our secondary school system.
Որովհետև 21-րդ դարի մասնակետը առանց լեզուների իմացության դատապարտված է մահվան.
Because especially the 21st century is condemned to death if it doesn't know any foreign language. So he's no longer a specialist, he's no longer competitive.
Ժողովրդական խոսքը ասում է ինչքան լեզու գիտես, այնքան մարդ ես.
And again the same world famous saying, the more language you know, the better person you are.
Մենք պատրաստ ենք աջակցելու բոլոր շահագրգիռ կազմակերպություններին միջազգային, որպեսզի կարողանանք իրոք մեր հանրապետությունում լեզուների դրվածքը բարելավել.
We are ready to support all the international stakeholders to improve the language foreign situation in our country.
Բայց այդ ուսուցում պետք է լինի համակարգված.
But this teaching should be systematized.
Որովհետև չի կարելի առաջի դասարանի երեխային կամ մակապարտեզի երեխային միանգամից սովորեցնել 5 լեզու.
Because I also agree with the opinion that one cannot and should not teach children who go to kindergarten or who is in the first form in school 5 foreign languages.
At the same time.
Որովհետև ես հիշում եմ,
At the same time, yes.
Իմ ժամանակ մենք օտար լեզուների ուսուցումը սկսում էինք 5-րդ դասարանից.
Because as far as I remember, when I was young, we started teaching the foreign languages in the 5th form.
Բայց այսօր Հայաստանում ունենք դպրոց, որ առաջի դասարանում երեխան միանգամից ուսումնասիրում է 4 լեզու.
But today we have got a school in Armenia where the foreign language teaching, including 4 foreign languages, started in the 1st form.
Սա ընդունելի տարբերակ չէ.
And I don't think this is an acceptable variant.
Ես կարծում եմ, որ բոլոր լեզուները պետք է հավասարաչափ ուսումնասիրվեն Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում.
I think that all languages should be learned on the same level, according to the same level of proficiency in our country.
Եթե այսօր դպրոցներում մեկ եվրոպական և մեկ սլավոնական լեզու է ուսուցանում, և նաև երրորդ եվրոպական լեզուն պետք է ուսուցանվի, բնականաբար անհրաժեշտություն է տալու նաև Հայաստանի մերձակա երկրների լեզուների ուսուցման խնդիրը.
So the situation in the secondary schools of Armenia today is the following. We study the Russian language and a foreign language, but now the question has arisen according to the introduction of a third foreign language. And I think that in this concern it's very important to study the languages of our neighboring countries as well.
Այստեղ շտապողականություն պետք չէ.
And this should not be done in a hurry or haste.
Եվ վերջում ցանկանում եմ մեր այս հանդիպմանը հաջողություններ և այս զեկույցը, որ այսօր ներկայացնում է, դրա մշակված ձևում կգտնի նաև Հայաստանի Հանրապետության լեզվական քաղաքականության պետական ծրագրում.
I wish all the best to the experts and additional fruitful work because the final version of the report will of course be reflected in the language education policy of Armenia.
Այդ ծրագիրը մշակված է և դրա մշակման կարիք ունի այս հանդիպումից հետո.
And I guess it will be greatly, not greatly, but somehow changed after the final version of the report has been submitted.
Շնորհակալություն.
Thank you.
Educational institutions, but we, as far as we know, it should embrace all types of civic institutions as well. And so we have a sort of discrepancy between the language level at educational institutions and at other civic institutions. And our population, especially adult population, is very heterogeneous in terms of multilingualism and plurilingualism. And Armenia has very little experience in this field. And I want to know, and I'm interested in the experience of other European countries in this respect. Thank you.
Question about the interaction of the education policy in society in general. Well, there are many surveys carried out concerning the question you have asked, what are the competencies in foreign languages of the various sectors of the population. And this is an European phenomenon that actually young people up to the age of 30 are really plurilingual and they communicate in one or two foreign languages. Well, there are problems and with adult population generally all over Europe, and that's the reason why there is this ambition that the main principles of the language education policy are spread over society in general, and to the educational institutions there is the idea of bringing more and more opportunities for adult population also to be involved in language learning, to give opportunities for that. And this is the general idea of lifelong learning, and with a special emphasis within generally the educational programs of adult education and training. And in many European countries there are already specific departments or divisions within their main educational authorities dealing with this, linking with the adult sector. One of the main methods and opportunities for that is just involving various sectors of the population together with people who are currently going through educational programs. This is one thing, and the other is through all the system of in-service, in-house training within the vocational sector in general. And there are many countries in which institutions are set on national level, the agencies combining vocational education but also vocational training, and setting specific standards for vocational training, including language learning, coherent with the standards involving vocational training. These are national agencies in lots of European countries. Also, to the ministries, there are these specific divisions already of continuing education, which also needs to have a look at what's going on in the adult sector, adult training. And actually, within this big initiative of lifelong learning, this coherence and this synergy can be envisaged and developed in the future. And this is the sort of, say, institutional, not actually institutional framework within which this can be achieved in the future.
If you go on the website, you really see. I could give you the website later on. There is quite a lot of interesting data because the report was updated last year. So about language provision in many European countries, you really see is linked to the European Union. So data are mainly about the 27 member states of the European Union, plus a number of other countries like Norway and Turkey and so on. But you will find quite a lot of interesting data on there. But even if there's no data about Armenia in the survey, from what we heard here, the plurilingual competence of the average Armenian citizen is far above many European citizens in Western Europe. And we hope that even when opening to Europe, you won't lose this rich heritage you have from your previous systems. Take the good things, but not the bad things from Europe.
Sorry, we can't control the PowerPoint from here, and we need an assistant. Thank you very much for that. So this is the next main area of questions that we wanted to raise and to discuss with you. This is the general idea of a coherent language education policy. And here we should say that this is an issue that has been sought and considered as a very important issue in many countries and in Europe, and including Armenia as well. And we have formulated this question as the question as whether we should have one language policy or language policies. And in this respect, in the report, we describe some of the main parameters of this problem, saying that actually what we observe here is not a single measure, not a single policy that's been implemented in various sectors and towards various languages, but we have a sort of separation of different policies which actually reflects the situation in the country, in the context. In this respect, we have a policy of Armenian and other mother tongues. There is the special situation and role of Russian, although treated as a foreign language. We understand that it has a special status in the country. Also, it shouldn't be neglected that the position of English as the language of wide communication and a global language has been very much strengthened in this country, and we quoted some figures about the number of students actually taking up English, and as a result of that, the big issue of how language diversification can be achieved. Well, our purpose and our approach in the report was not that we should deny these differences. I mean, these differences are a fact in Armenian society, as we describe similar differences when we look at other countries concerning language policy. But what we should do is examine them and examine how they could become common policy, how a common policy could accommodate all these differences. So we also say, and it has been already mentioned, and I'm not going to repeat it in these details, that the situation in Armenia we describe as very favorable, as propitious situation in terms of legal framework, attitude to national minority languages. But at the same time, we find a specific asset in this society in Armenia, and we have observed the functional bilingualism which is connected with the role of Russian in society and the position in Russian. Also, yesterday we were reminded, and we also included this in the report, that due to this enormous diaspora of Armenians throughout the world, I mean, all the world languages are actually spoken by Armenian people. Come to the country, some of them return to the country, or that want to have contacts with the country, which is an enormous resource for you and for supporting the plurilingualism in this society. So there is big potential for fruitful collaboration between languages, and we, in our visits last time, we also noticed and we observed these synergies while visiting schools with bilingual education, and we were really impressed by that. It is also important to say that it is true, and this is a situation in many European countries, and what I've said before, that this is the individual aspiration of the learner really to start with English and to have a good and to achieve a good command of English in throughout education. And sometimes we see that as a deficiency, because in our global world we understand that English is not enough, it's not sufficient. Other languages might in various situations become more important. But we also should look at the fact that this gives us an enormous opportunity to further encourage and promote other languages. So in this situation, we observed, we noted in the report the special steps that have been undertaken by the government and within the legal framework of the country concerning language diversification. Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. So we very much welcome the introduction of a third language, and yesterday in the ministry this idea was again discussed, and we also in the report offer further the utilization, the use of the specific tools developed by the Council of Europe for describing the competencies, for looking for synergies between languages, for really developing plurilingual competence. At the same time, in the report, because now we enter, and we've called it in the report, a four-language policy, because actually we have the Armenian language, Russian plus probably two foreign languages that could have been envisaged later. So actually, there are a number of issues and challenges that need to be reflected upon and looked very carefully, that have been observed as difficulties and challenges in other European countries. For instance, we have a limited resource of time throughout the educational system, so hours, as Jean-Claude has already mentioned, can become more than 45 minutes in your case. So we do not have the enormous resource of time to include more and more languages, and so learning across the curriculum of foreign languages should be looked more closely as an option. Also, we suggested that the definition of the language competencies provided, the opportunities provided by the Common European Framework should be more carefully looked upon and more fruitfully used, especially for vocational training, where we do not need achievement of integrated skills. And we formulated this as a description in a chat, in a variegated, not even language competence. Also, we would like to draw your attention to the opportunity to treat foreign language teaching as a single discipline at school, where synergies between the languages can be sought, and that can provide more resources and more time for efficient and effective language learning. And last but not least, this is the question of motivation. We are observing in Europe a sort of dropping of motivation in learning more languages. So although we observe this enthusiasm here, it is particularly in young learners, there is an age when, it might become a bit boring, so we have to deal with this situation as well. The other issue is about coherence, so this is a general issue about the coherence of the language policy implemented in the country. The other issue is about the continuity and coherence across phases. And here we have drawn your attention in the report to several important issues, as for example, the issue of the continuity between the different levels. I'll give an example, and I'll draw on one of the questions that has been asked here about private lessons and private tuition in general. So it is a lack of coherence if entrance exam to the university can be achieved only through provision of a very substantial private tuition, then there is really a lack of coherence and continuity between the different phases. So also we draw your attention to the continuity between university and secondary level in terms of description of language competencies. And in this respect, we have observed and we noticed some positive steps concerning the unified state exam system, the establishment of a very clear educational path for the individual, which is important, opportunities for transfer of credits as it is nowadays very fashionable to say between secondary and university level, especially in language teaching. And also we draw your attention to the fact that this can't be achieved only within the educational system, that there is the need of concerted efforts of many stakeholders, as we were talking about civil society, employers, parents concerning primary education. And in this area, we have identified a series of proposals that we would like to draw your attention to, which are systematized on this slide in these three main areas. Conceptualizing the idea of languages education, and also of a languages teacher, and supporting the development of dualist linguistic capability at university level, and simplification of new programs and linking them to the Common European Council of Europe standards.
Okay, we will continue. Maybe we'll address those problems at the end because they are all, let's say, more technical, methodological questions, and maybe have to be treated together. What we notice is that there has been a great achievement with the new curriculum for language. That this is the first time that there is a national curriculum framework with strategies and for implementation standards and so on. Very rich document, and concerning especially languages, of course. What we notice with interest is that the standards are the same for all foreign languages, which is going in the direction of converging, making all the teaching of languages converge, not to be unified, but converge in defining principles, aims, objectives, and some strategies. And that all that should, in a way, give more transparency for the objective, and then for the teaching, and then for the assessment. One of the major implications of the curriculum, as we've read it, is a major tentative or an orientation with a major student-centered methodology. Because here, as in many other countries, language teaching is still transmission of knowledge and from teacher to student, and not always the ways in which a student could acquire by himself, and not only by transferring information, some language competence. So this curriculum is going on what we consider the right direction, and we are happy to see that the Council of Europe documents have been of large influence on this curriculum. So maybe now what has to be done is to see how the curriculum is implemented actually, and to try to maybe look for more diversification on the objectives and verify that the objectives are realistic. Because in many European countries, for example, for the first foreign language, the objective is B2, for example, in all competencies, which is out of reach. Because B2 in written competence is not easy, even with 12 years of teaching. So verify that objectives are realistic, and try to modulate the objective according to the competencies that are aimed at. And maybe for third language or more on, not consider certain competencies, but maybe for the third language, written competence is not important because there is no time to do that in a proper way. Second point, textbooks. What we notice is that the standards of the new curriculum provide a clear basis for new textbooks, and that those textbooks are still in a very strange situation because you use still Russian textbook translated into Armenian. And in some cases, this translation creates problem because those textbooks have been organized for Russian kids and learners having Russian as a first language and not Armenian. And in some cases, this creates some problems because the contrastive, let's say, approach is not the same, of course, between French and Armenian or French and Russian, of course. So the report encourages the trend which we noticed to produce your own textbook. I think that you have all the capacities, resources, I say intellectual, methodological, and industrial, to produce your own textbooks, which are the most adapted to your kids. And this is a direction that we support. Considering that what we have been saying, that there is a general complaint about the period, the tender period for the author, between the way they provide the textbook and the moment in which they are supposed to give to the authority the projects to be judged. Last point in this element, evaluation and assessment. We have already discussed that in our previous debates. The report is very short on that, but it's maybe the biggest problem. There is one page on this, even less, but the coherence between exams at the end of secondary school, entering university, for example, the coherence between requirements at the end of each phase of education are a problem. We have been saying that it's going, a reflection and modernization is going on. Actually, the report just stresses that and says, okay, there is a need for new ways to consider assessment in relationship with new standards. And it's a very touchy question because we know that end of secondary school exam is very socially influenced and maybe many opinions about that. But the direction which is now taken by our educational authorities seems, according to us, the good direction, and we are ready to help to go further. And that's it for evaluation.
Yes, and I can go on here with the last two bullets on this slide, saying that, I mean, a language educational policy can be the best policy in the world, but if we do not have the support of the teachers, then probably it will fail. So in this particular part of the report, we say how much it is important to really focus on teachers' involvement. And we have noted, and in this particular situation, teacher training and professional development for teachers actually becomes of critical importance. And we have observed also some models for organizing teacher training concerning the introduction of the new curriculum using a cascading model, looking for teacher trainers and to support the whole process. But we have also heard about some concerns whether this is going to be a permanent model, so some concerns about the permanency of this situation of teacher training. And I didn't answer the question raised in the very beginning by one of our contributors here about whether teacher training that has been initiated will continue for the future, and whether this will become a part, an important part of the educational development in general. And also in this process, we raised the issue of the opportunity of convergence between languages again, because teacher training can be organized not following the methodology that it is language specific, but setting common objectives and describing competencies gives us opportunity for incorporating languages, for looking for synergies between languages, for convergence between languages. We should also, as an expert team, would like to say and congratulate you for the very good standards and sometimes excellency that we have observed concerning initial training of teachers. And we hope that these standards and this devotion will be maintained in the future. But we also raised the issue of utilization of use of ICT and new technology in teacher training, which is an important area probably in which further development is needed. And again, bearing in mind the specificity of the situation in the country, and especially with the rural areas, lack of teachers, as it has been mentioned, we encourage the authorities and the universities to establish a program at university level for dual linguistic teacher, and I understand there has been some development in this area. International contacts are also very important, but the main issue here is how to harness, how to utilize the resources that have been provided by international organizations, cultural institutions in the area of teacher training, but bearing in mind the specific needs that there are in the country. And in this section, actually, we have the most number of proposals for discussion, and you can see them on the slide. Yes. In all these areas, they come from point 8 to 14. They're very concrete, and as Claude has already said, because we feel that these sometimes little steps, not big political issues that we can discuss, and if we take these little steps, this can lead us to very good results at the end. In this area of proposals, we have identified the standardization of initial teacher training courses, the clear standards, especially for vocational education, and here the partial competencies that Jean-Claude has already talked about. Educational innovation, including content language integrated learning as well, apart from use of ICT and new technology in general. And we strongly support experimentation in this area. And we also feel that some of the specialized schools where we observe this synergy between languages can be used further as hubs, as centers for further experimentation and use of technology. And also the last bullet on this slide says how important it is to use the power and the resources offered by cultural institutions and European institutions by general to support contacts with learners and teachers in other countries, Because today also one of our contributors expressed the concern that they learn these languages but they lack contacts, real life contacts with people speaking these languages.
Before the last discussion, just the last point, which is one of the proposals we made here, which is not very original, but it's helpful everywhere. Here, like in other European countries and like in other countries in general, we know and we have seen here that language policy are conducted and are implemented by many actors in many centers of decision. Might be school, secondary school, higher education, vocational, but industry, ONGs, regional and local even initiatives. Many actors are even the Minister of Interior, as they call it in France, has something to say about languages, for example. Because if you want to become an Armenian citizen, suppose you have to demonstrate that you speak Armenian. And if you want to demonstrate that you speak Armenian, you have to assess that in a way. And you have to define a level. And how do you do that? So many ministries and organizations are involved. And the question is that in this context, everybody does what seems to be important for him, but there is no coordination. So the main thing to do is to try to coordinate all those actors in different ways, but you have at the highest level a political coordination of linguistic policies in a country, with the Ministry of External Affairs, or Foreign Office, for example, which is another action. So, what is proposed in the last proposal is to think about a coordinator, probably political coordinator. In some countries there is some coordinator which is in the cabinet of the Prime Minister and who is in charge of linguistic policy. And helped in that by agency, commission, institute, whatever, in charge of implementation, control, information of the linguistic policies that are implemented anywhere in the country. So this is a very important proposal, not per se, but I mean to create more efficiency and coherence between all the sectors of linguistic and national linguistic policy, and even international in the case. And this is the last proposal you will find in the report. And now we can discuss a little bit.
Three very important parts of the report, but they are very connected, so I think the discussion can be around all of these issues. I would like to react on the last suggestion. I think it's very important because of course our national report was the attempt to coordinate different language policies about many actors who are involved. Because we can see that there's no true coherence between different levels of education, between, for example, university and secondary school, between preschool education and primary schools, between the NGOs and the private sector. So we can see a lot of inconsistency between different languages, between curriculum and so on. And what is the main problem? Of course, your report that you provide to us, that is the very valuable effort to coordinate and to provide some keys. But who will we implement this? I think there is the strong need to have something like language council. That there are some in many countries, For example, in many regions and countries of Spain, there are such language councils which are responsible for regional language, for the national language, Castilian language, for the foreign languages. Of course, otherwise we cannot have the coherent policy of the different language policies. And I think your example is in the Council of Europe, very strong language policy division, strong by its capacities, not by the number of the staff, but everyone is very fluent and very flexible in the approach. It is possible to coordinate in some respect all the policies in Europe. So you can see there is no need to have such a huge new ministry for languages. It is possible to specialize on very definite problems and connected with all the actors of the language policy. It will be more coordinating center, which we can, for example, to consider different types of evaluation. For example, now we have this year, the entrance exams in written and in oral form. And I'm not sure about consistency between two types of exams, because in difference, they have different authors and different responsible organizations who are responsible for that. So we have a lot of questions, and maybe that's very practical and very maybe central suggestion to have the center of the body which is responsible for implementation for all this language policy and language policies.
Yeah, as Mr. Zolian said, I think we're all a bit tired because it is quite difficult to stay together during 3 hours and relying on interpretation and so on. But if you still have some remarks, please feel free and please do so. Send us your remarks on the report, which would be useful for the finalization of the last document. We are very happy to hear officially that the final document will be taken into account in the revision of the language education policy of Armenia. So we feel that even with the political changes in Armenia recently, we know that the Minister of Education has resigned, but there is continuity in the Ministry of Education, so we are very happy for that, because you need the backing from the ministry to go further. So many thanks to all your contributions, because we met many of you last year and we took all your observations, all your expertise into account to write our expert report. We will now go to the next phase, writing the expert report. For Dr. King, it will be quite a difficult task because he is the main pen in writing this and he was not present, so he relies on our feedback and on your written feedback if you still have something for us to say. So we are also happy that Armenia is taking a very active part in our new project on languages in schooling, as we know that Armenian as a language is not only important for national identity, it is especially important for you in this historical phase, recent independence and so on, and the diaspora. But it is also very important as the language of schooling, as you wish to ensure successful learning for your children. So we are happy to have Armenia as a very active partner in our new project on language of schooling. And Mr. Zolian is coming to Strasbourg in June to make sure that we have this good link in all our European countries. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you, and we promise that we will finalize our report and send it to you. We will not come back to monitor, because this is not an audit, it is just a friendly cooperation. We present our report, you do with it what you wish, but we would be very happy to hear from you and to see how you evolve further, and we will surely pay attention to this. Thank you very much, and thank you for your warm welcome every time we came to Armenia.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your patience, but let me say two words in addition. First of all, Johanna, thank you for the invitation. Of course, it's very important to be in contact with our European partners, and Strasbourg Council of Europe, thank you for this individual, is the best place, a place where you can meet the best specialists from all Europe. And I would like to express my gratitude for your report. It was very interesting to know, and that's only about 47 pages, but you can see how many substantial information you can find in these 47 pages. And I strongly recommend you to read all these 47 pages and make your comments, because you can see that each page maybe can be the matter for the special research and implementation, because each point is very important. And what is interesting, we can see that when we change our opinions, when we share our experience, we can see that this report is in some respect innovative, because before, when we met the other reports and we used the other reports, the other states and regional reports, of course we used it. But now I can see the experts of Council of Europe who are quite aware about linguistic situation in different countries propose new style of reporting. You can see how many work was done before coming here. It was the homework of our experts, and I hope to see you again and again. Let me express gratitude of our university and for your very valuable contribution to the linguistic education in Armenia. The Synod of our university awarded you, we have only one award, the medal on the occasion of 70 years of university. It was coined 4 years ago, and next year we have the next 75 years of university, and we have in mind you as a best candidate for the new medal. But now let me award you, and of course Reed King, for this medal. Your Honor, that is yours. And that is translation. Official translation. And for our most important opinion.
Yes. Thank you.
Jean-Paul?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maria? That is yours. And that is for the king is the process of the second. Yes. Okay, we prepare the Armenian version. Okay. That is the small souvenirs about Armenia and Armenian culture. Thank you. Բոլորի շնորհակալություն, եւ ես կխնդրեմ, որ իսկապես ծանոթանալով այդ զեկույցին մենք գրենք մեր առաջարկությունները,